What's up guys, Sean here, and today we're going to talk about the Democratic South Carolina debate because it was a complete and utter disaster all the way around. Now for a lot of people, the Nevada debate was the most fun debate so far. Warren attacked Bloomberg, Bloomberg attacked Sanders, Biden attacked Bloomberg, Amy Klobuchar was about to club Pete Buttigieg over the head with her binder. Great time, I enjoyed it, and most of us enjoyed it. However, I did have some critiques of the candidates. I thought Biden needed to demand more time instead of giving in every time his clock was about to run out. And I gave praise to Pete Buttigieg for controlling the pace of the conversation whenever he was asked a question, even though I personally find his speaking cadence to be incredibly annoying. However, the people that I should have praised in the Nevada debate were the moderators of that debate, because they really were able to rein in most of the candidates and cut off a lot of the nonsense that these debates could devolve into. Which is why the biggest losers of this debate are by far and away the CBS moderators, because they in no way, shape, or form controlled this debate. Candidates were jumping in on each other, they were talking over each other. Pete Buttigieg was allowed to run roughshod over people, and he ended up transforming from somebody who was emulating Obama's speaking cadence to somebody who was still emulating Obama's speaking cadence, but copying the robotic nature of Marco Rubio and the schmarmy nature, I don't know how to say that word, schmarmy? I'm not sure, of Ted Cruz. Almost every single candidate in this debate had a significantly worse performance than their Nevada debate, except for two. Mayor Mike Bloomberg, because you cannot get much worse than what happened to him in the Nevada debate. In fact, Michael Bloomberg's polling numbers, his approval numbers, actually dipped 20 points after his Nevada debate performance. You literally cannot do worse than that. And Joe Biden actually did improve, and he actually improved in a lot of the areas I critiqued him on in the last cycle. I said that he needed to demand his time and not yield to the moderators, and he did that.
I'm not out of time. You spoke over time, and I'm going to talk. Here's the deal. Fact of the matter is.
However, unlike Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, and Tom Steyer, Biden was able to do this in such a way that he didn't come off as petty or incredibly rude. Now, a lot of people are busting up Joe Biden for saying that 150 million people in the United States of America have died from gun violence since the year 2007, which is patently ridiculous.
150 million people have been killed since 2007 when Bernie voted to exempt the gun manufacturers from liability.
That's literally half the population of the United States of America dying over a 10 or actually 13-year time period. Insane. But people are busting him up over it, saying that he was lying when he was quoting these numbers. You can't say that Joe Biden doesn't know how to talk and he flubs all the time and then call him a liar when he makes a clear flub. So was this bad? Was this cringy? Was this yet another moment of Joe Biden not being able to speak concisely or accurately? 100%. But was this a lie by Joe Biden? Absolutely not. Will this damage Joe Biden, who has a reputation for misspeaking? Absolutely not. However, if you set the $150 million flub aside for a second and actually go into the substance of the conversation around that flub, you realize that the substance is far more damaging long-term to the Democratic Party. Because what they were criticizing Bernie Sanders for in that instance, and yes, I am going to defend Bernie Sanders, was that according to them, he voted to give gun manufacturers and gun retailers immunity from lawsuits like no other company has, which is patently false.
But my friend to my right and others have, in fact, also given to the gun manufacturers absolute immunity.
You can still sue gun manufacturers in the United States of America for any reason that you would be able to sue another company. So if there's a defective product, you can sue them for that defective product, especially if that defection is what causes you an injury. If gun manufacturers participate in false advertisement, you can sue them for misleading advertisement. In fact, right now, going through the courts as I'm recording this video, there is an incredibly flimsy false advertisement lawsuit against a major gun manufacturer, and that's not banned by this so-called immunity that Bernie Sanders voted for. But what you're not allowed to do is file frivolous lawsuits against gun manufacturers for criminal use of their products when their products work as intended, which makes all the sense in the world. These are the same exact protections that are granted to companies like automobile companies. And the reason that provision of law exists is because absent that provision, politically minded actors who hate guns like Mayor Bloomberg would likely target gun manufacturers as an end around the Second Amendment in order to strip your rights by suing for frivolous wrongful death claims. Because it's not about beating the gun manufacturers. That can be ruled on and determined by a jury. It's about bankrupting them. Obviously, since we have Second Amendment protections, this is a logical extension of those Second Amendment protections. Furthermore, if it weren't for politically minded actors and politically motivated anti-gun judges, this provision of law would not need to exist. You, as a bank, if you get robbed, cannot sue General Motors if their car is used as the getaway car in that bank robbery. In fact, there are no other circumstances within this country where a product working exactly as advertised is grounds for a lawsuit. Now, with that explanation, that should just go to show you how radical the Democratic Party has become, because the one reasonable position that Bernie Sanders has ever held is the one thing that he consistently gets attacked for, and that those attacks actually stick for. There is nothing wrong with that provision of law. It makes perfect sense, and there's virtually no argument against it unless you believe that it's acceptable to litigate a company to death because you don't like the politics surrounding that company's existence. Now, of course, I'm defending Bernie Sanders for that vote. However, it is incredibly unfortunate that Bernie Sanders was too cowardly to actually defend that vote himself. However, there was one positive moment from Bernie Sanders where he was not only right on the policy, but he actually stuck up for what he actually believed and said the right thing and landed a pretty good attack on one of his opponents. And that related to Michael Bloomberg saying that Xi Jinping, the president of China, is responsive to the Politburo. Bernie Sanders accurately pointed out, who the hell is the Politburo?
In terms of whether he's a dictator, he does serve at the behest of the Politburo, of their group of people. But there's no question he has an enormous amount of power.
Well, then I was really amazed at what Mayor Bloomberg just said a moment ago. He said that the Chinese government is responsive to the Politburo. But who the hell is the Politburo responsive to? Who elects the Politburo?
Now, this was a really good moment for Bernie Sanders. I call it the best moment of the debate for him, because he was actually right on the policy here, and he was right that Michael Bloomberg caters to the Chinese Communist government way too much, and it's completely unacceptable. Also, this response came during the course of a debate where Bernie was finally, and deservedly by the way, attacked for his support for every communist and socialist regime throughout human history. Now, if I were Michael Bloomberg, I would have responded to this by pointing out that Bernie Sanders has consistently praised the Chinese Communist government. In fact, Bernie praises the Chinese Communist regime for lifting more Chinese people out of poverty than any other regime in history.
You've praised the Chinese Communist Party for lifting more people out of extreme poverty than any other country.
Now, while it is true that a lot of Chinese people are being lifted out of poverty, Bernie Sanders attributes them being lifted out of poverty to Chinese communist government, not them moving away from their communist system, which is completely ridiculous because if you look at a chart of Chinese people's standard of living, you can see, based on the markings, that they only started to rise up out of poverty when the Chinese government started recognizing private property. Socialism completely failed in China, just like it always does and always will everywhere else that it's tried. And if you look at this chart, the Chinese economy and the average income of Chinese citizens only started to grow after they started recognizing private property. They recognized farmers' private property first, then they started recognizing Chinese people's ability to own their own businesses, and look at the chart of economic progress in that nation. Now, it is completely obvious to anyone who examines the world objectively that private property recognition is the key to economic growth, and that is diametrically opposed to what Bernie Sanders and every socialist and communist regime actually stand for. You can see this in a comparison of China before and after they recognized private property, or you can see this in a comparison between China and Hong Kong. Hong Kong has none of the resources of mainland China, but because they were an English colony and therefore they were run under English common law, which recognizes private property rights, the average Hong Konger still, to this day, and throughout all the time that China was communist, had significantly higher income and significantly higher per capita GDP numbers than the mainland. Now, while Bloomberg did definitely lose that exchange to Sanders, which is a step back for him because he was one of the very few people to land a solid hit on Sanders in the last debate, he did have some good comebacks for Elizabeth Warren. However, he did fail to engage her properly when Elizabeth Warren was making an obvious false statement that people have proven false, months ago in this campaign.
And what the senator did suggest was that we release these women from the non-disclosure agreement. I did that 2 days later, and my company has said we will not use non-disclosure agreements ever again. The senator has got it, and I don't know what else she wants us to do.
Oh, I'll be
We're
clear.
following exactly what she asked to
tell
do.
you exactly
and the
what I
trouble
want you to
is, with this senator, enough is never enough.
Look, you guys know I don't like Michael Bloomberg at all, but that's a solid hit on Elizabeth Warren because it makes her look petty and politically motivated, which is obviously true because Elizabeth Warren is incredibly petty and clearly politically motivated. He said that he released these people from their NDAs 3 days after the last debate, like Warren asked, and Warren is still attacking him over it, even though he did exactly what she said.
Come on.
Is to do a release of all people who have
We are
discrimination
doing that, Senator.
claims. Look, who have discrimination.
And the fact that the crowd started booing Elizabeth Warren during that exchange really stemmed the momentum of her attacks. Now, a lot of people are calling shenanigans on the crowd being unusually pro-Bloomberg, like he stacked the crowd with his staffers and his supporters so he could get more cheers from the live audience so he could look better during the debate. And honestly, I'm not exactly sure what the criticism of Bloomberg, if he actually did this, actually is. Every single candidate does this, it's a part of the strategy, but people only seem to have a problem with it now when it's Michael Bloomberg because they're trying to push forward the narrative that Michael Bloomberg is buying the election. In fact, I'd say that Bernie Sanders is way more guilty of this during the course of the campaign than any candidate currently running, but the most guilty candidate of this, and I know I have a lot of his supporters in my audience, is Andrew Yang. There is no way you can watch the early debates with Andrew Yang and hear people shouting every time he says give them $1,000 like crazy and not think that Andrew Yang placed his supporters in the audience. Again, I'm not saying this to be disparaging to Andrew Yang, Michael Bloomberg, Bernie Sanders, or any of the other candidates or any of the other candidates' supporters. It's a good strategy to have the live studio audience cheer for what you say, and this is obviously something that is done by a lot of campaigns, whether it happens more often naturally and organically for other candidates like Yang or like Bernie Sanders. I'm sure that's true, but it's still a good strategy, and all the candidates to some degree participate in it. And if you're going to call this out during the debate, you have to call it out the exact same way Donald Trump did when he was going up against Jeb Bush.
By the way, let me just tell you, we needed tickets. You can't get them. You know who has the tickets for I'm talking about to the television audience? Donors, special interest, the people that are putting up the money. So it is. The RNC told us we have all donors in the audience, and the reason they're not loving me, the reason they're not loving me is I don't want their money. I'm going to do the right thing for the American public. I don't want their money. I don't need their money. And I'm the only one up here that can say that.
If you want to call this thing out, you have to call it out during the debate with some strength behind you. You can't come out after the debate and say, I didn't like the fact that Michael Bloomberg had too many people cheering for him in the audience. That's not fair. That makes you look incredibly weak, and it also makes you look like you lost the debate, and you're looking for an excuse on why you lost the debate. Now back to my other Warren point. During the course of Warren's attack on Bloomberg, she brought up this story that she's told many times on the campaign trail about how when she was 21 years old and she was visibly pregnant, she got fired from her job for being visibly pregnant. And Bloomberg tried to say, well, if you were a teacher in New York City, that wouldn't have happened, meaning that he, as mayor, would not have allowed that to happen. But what Bloomberg should have actually said is that did not happen, because there is evidence that Warren is lying.
When I was 21 years old, I got my first job as a special education teacher. I loved that job. And by the end of the first year, I was visibly pregnant. The principal wished me luck and gave my job to someone else.
Now, it's important to understand that Elizabeth Warren was hired as a teacher before she completed her education, making her a credentialed teacher, which means that Elizabeth Warren's status had to be reviewed by the local school board. And the local school board actually has transcripts of them reviewing Elizabeth Warren's status. And it turns out that despite what Elizabeth Warren said about the sexist principal and the patriarchy coming down against her for being pregnant, she was offered the job again, but she herself refused to take it. This is on record, this is public. If you assert it during the debate and people go out and look for the information and do the fact checks, it will come back true. And Michael Bloomberg, again, I have to ding his staff for not preparing him properly. He knew that Warren was going to attack him again, but he was not prepared to rebut one of the lies that Warren has already been caught telling consistently.
40 Democrats, 21 of those were people that I spent $100 million to help elect. All of the new Democrats that came in and put Nancy Pelosi in charge and gave the Congress the ability to control this president, I got them.
Now on to Amy Klobuchar and Tom Steyer. Neither of them showed up to the debate. There's nothing to talk about with Amy Klobuchar or Tom Steyer, except for the fact that Joe Biden landed a pretty good hit on Tom Steyer, and considering Steyer is spending a lot of money in South Carolina, that was a pre-planned, well-placed hit by Joe Biden. Now on to Pete Buttigieg. As I said earlier, his cadence is really grinding on me, and it was turned up to maximum obnoxiousness during this debate. He kept trying to do the Obama thing. He kept talking over his time and kept talking over the moderators. And he was even talking over the other candidates when they were specifically called upon. And he wasn't talking prior to them being called upon.
Raising the minimum wage to a living wage. Do we think building the millions of units of affordable housing that we need? Do we think raising taxes on billionaires is a radical idea?
Let's talk about what's radical about that plan.
Reform is a radical idea.
The things you just named.
Do we think immigration reform? The truth is, that the American people support my agenda. That is why I am beating Trump in virtually every poll that has done, and why I will defeat him.
We got to open this up. Universal health care first.
Now, I've said this over and over again throughout my videos covering these debates, that I think it's insane that the candidates are not attacking Bernie Sanders. There's a ton of material to dig up and throw against this guy, and he's the obvious frontrunner, so you need to attack him. So I do appreciate Pete Buttigieg's effort in that regard. However, you have to attack in such a way that you don't damage yourself while doing it. Remember, in my last video where I talked about Warren's attacks, I pointed out that the real beneficiary from those attacks was not Elizabeth Warren, it was Joe Biden, because Joe Biden didn't look like he was picking a fight, unlike Elizabeth Warren. Well, Pete Buttigieg looked like he was picking a fight. He looked like he was itching to score points off of Bernie Sanders. So I don't think Pete Buttigieg is going to benefit from looking that petty and looking that obviously politically motivated. One of the biggest highlights of the 2016 Republican primary debates was Chris Christie doing a murder-suicide against Marco Rubio. However, that was a murder-suicide because as he was attacking Rubio and destroying Rubio's political future, Christie destroyed himself, and Trump was the beneficiary of those attacks. As fun as the Rubio-Chris Christie thing is, it really didn't benefit Chris Christie to actually do it. It didn't benefit him in the polls of that election, and it didn't help him get any job in the Trump administration. Should you attack Sanders? 100%, but you have to do it in such a way that you come off authentic in your attacks. You can't be robotic. You can't do it in such a way that you do more damage to yourself than the person you're actually attacking. And you can't leave opportunities open for other candidates on the stage to clean up after your attacks and get all the benefits from it. That's what happened to Buttigieg in South Carolina. So in summation, I think all of the candidates except for Biden and Sanders did terrible and damaged themselves going forward. I think Bernie Sanders did slightly better than terrible because he did land a few hits on other people because Sanders actually fights back and he comes off as passionate. But I think Biden did the best. He had the best attacks. He didn't take any real attacks. And he had the best line at the end of the debate when they asked a personal question.
What's the biggest misconception about you, sir?
I have more hair than I think I do.
Everybody else gave overly processed answers, Elizabeth Warren being the absolute worst, but Biden had a good joke in there, and he seemed authentic. There were some shows of strength from Joe Biden, which was important, and although he lost the ability to talk like he does in every debate for part of this debate, it was less than usual, and as I said before, that's not really as important as a lot of people tend to say it is or pretend it is. But those are my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, support me via my donation links, follow me on all my social medias. This has been me talking about the South Carolina Democratic debate. Till next time.